Welcome back to the live webinar shir here from BINA. This week we have been talking about the topic Torah's view on animal rights. Let's recap. On Monday we spoke about Torah's strict laws about protecting animals' dignity and sparing them from any unnecessary pain. For example, we have to feed our animals before we feed ourselves. We are forbidden to sit down to eat till we have fed all the animals which are under our possession. We even spoke about that in certain rabbinic transgressions, like milking a cow on Shabbos, we are allowed to do in a certain way which is only forbidden rabbinically in order to prevent the cow from having pain. So far does the Torah go to protect and spare the animal from any unnecessary pain. However, although the Torah gives animals rights, in no way does that mean that animal life and human life are equal. As we spoke about on Monday, as certain animal rights groups want to say. Rather, there was an infinite difference between the importance of a human life and an animal life. It is not me who decided that it is God who decides right from wrong, moral from immoral, has decided and put down in the Torah that it is moral to kill animals under certain circumstances, but it is basically almost always immoral to kill an innocent human being. Let's have a look and analyze this and try and understand this by looking at the history of when it actually became permitted for human beings to consume meat, to eat meat, because it wasn't always like that. When Adam Harishon, the first human being, was created, God told him that you can eat. The verse reads like this: "Behold, I have given you every seed-bearing herb which is upon the surface of the entire earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruits, it shall be yours for food." The verse clearly states that God gave Adam Harishon the permission to eat only fruits and vegetables and plants, things that grow from the ground, and not permission to kill animals to eat their meat. However, after the flood, when Noach left the ark, God commanded him and allowed him, gave him permission to consume meat, to eat meat. Which parenthetically is the reason why the 7 well-known universal moral code is known as the 7 Noahide laws. Amongst them are not to kill, not to steal, laws which don't only apply to the Jewish people, but apply to the entire world. The reason why it's attributed to Noach is because the last one which was given is the commandment that we are forbidden to eat, that the entire mankind, every human being, is forbidden to eat a limb from a living animal. It is called Eiver min hachai. When we eat meat, we are commanded to kill the animal first and only then eat its meat. So that law was only applicable from Noach and onwards. Before then, it was irrelevant because we were not allowed to eat meat at all. So therefore, it's called the 7 Noahide laws. So what's going on over here? Is Torah just allowing us to eat meat? Because if it's a good thing to eat meat, so why from the beginning of time, as soon as the first human being was created, it should have been permitted for Adam to eat meat? It seems to be that ideally, the way God created the world in its original plan, it was that human beings should not eat meat. Only after the flood was Noach given permission to eat meat. So it seems like it's just it's not the ideal. It seems to be just that's the way it happened to happen, that at the end we're allowed to eat meat for whatever reason, but it's not really the way it's supposed to be. On the other hand, not only are we allowed to eat meat, under certain circumstances we are actually commanded to eat meat. For example, sacrifices. All the sacrifices in the temple, or most of the sacrifices I should say, were from animals. And in a lot of the cases there, we were commanded to actually eat the meat, either us or the Kohanim. But either way, the meat in most sacrifices had to be eaten. And on Yom Tov, on the festivals, our sages tell us, Ein simcha el bebasar, joy on the festival comes from eating meat. So it seems to be that it's not just we are allowed to eat meat, and although really ideally it's a negative thing, it seems to be that it's actually a positive aspect to killing an animal and eating its meat. So which one is it? So in Jewish thought, there are two perspectives. There's the philosophical approach and there's the Kabbalistic approach. The philosophical approach, Rabbi Yosef Albo, which authored the Sefer, the book, called Sefer HaIkrim, which means the Book of Fundamentals, which is basically a book of Jewish philosophy. He lived in the 15th century. He says that God's original plan was that the human being should never kill any animals to eat their meat. Why? For two reasons. Number one, killing is cruel. By killing a lot, even if it's animals, that tendency, that murderous tendency can rub off and the human being can adopt that tendency, that evil trait of murder. So therefore, God's original plan was that any killing should be forbidden because killing is a cruel act. And God did not want human beings to be cruel. Secondly, he says, certain animals have negative character traits that if the human being would consume them, would eat them, then the human being would actually adopt and take those negative character traits from the animal. Therefore, God's original plan when he created the world was that we should not eat meat, and that was the ideal. However, what happened was a terrible misconception. When people started to realize that animals and human beings both are not allowed to be killed, they started to put on the same level animals and human beings. Look, we can't kill any of them. Which sounds wonderful, but what ended up happening was that if an animal is like a human being, then a human being is like an animal. And just like an animal steals, and just like an animal is evil and not evil, but even just like an animal is immoral and not necessarily moral in their relationships, so too a human being the human beings of those generations from Adam started to adopt the characteristics of an animal, saying that if an animal and a human being are the same, then a human being can be like an animal, and we can act like an animal, and we're not responsible for our actions, which led to the terrible descent of the morality of the human being, which led to the generation of the flood, which were immoral and stealing, and therefore God had to destroy all of mankind with the great flood. After the flood, God decided to rectify the situation by saying that we are allowed to, and in some cases we actually must, kill animals to eat their meat, to put very clearly the higher caliber that a human being has over an animal, to emphasize that a human being is not an animal. An animal, although its life is important, and although we are commanded to treat it with dignity, etc., but at the end of the day, our life is infinitely more valuable. And therefore, how do we bring that out? The fact that we are allowed to kill an animal to eat its meat. To take care of the second issue, therefore, it's true that actually certain meats in the Torah are forbidden to eat, because those animals, he says in the Sefer HaIkrim, have bad character traits, and therefore we don't want it to rub off on the human being, so only certain animals became permitted for us to eat. That's the approach. If you take this approach, then yes, killing animals is actually not a good thing. And eating meat is actually ideally not the plan that God had for the human being. It just serves an incredibly important purpose to bring out the infinite greatness that a human being has over an animal, that we should never make the same mistake, that we should start acting like animals. Then there's the Kabbalistic approach. The Kabbalistic approach is that the Kabbalah explains that this world is made up of 4 categories. There's doimim, there's the inanimate, like stones and dirt. There's the plant life, soimeach, trees, grass, plants, fruit, vegetables. Then there's chai, there's the animal kingdom, and then there's medaber, the human being. Kabbalah explains that everything was created for the purpose of being elevated to the higher one. So doimim's purpose, the inanimate, the purpose of the ground is to facilitate the growth of vegetation, of plants, of trees. When the earth, when the soil, when the rocks facilitate the growth of vegetation, it gets elevated to the level of the plant. When an animal eats the plant gets elevated to the level of an animal, which is obviously higher than a plant. When a human being eats an animal, we actually are elevating the animal to the level of a human being. What's the purpose of the human being? The purpose of the human being is to then serve God and be elevated and become godly. However, this only works if we eat the meat as human beings. What do I mean to say by that? If a person is just eating the meat, just to enjoy themselves and just to indulge in physical pleasures, then it's basically an animal eating an animal. Yes, technically it's a human being, but if we're just self-indulgent and the whole reason why we're eating it is just for selfish reasons, so what makes us, the consumer of the animal, better than the animal that we are eating? So in Kabbalah it explains that the way we elevate the meat is if we eat the meat with the right intentions, that will use the strength and the power that we get from the meat to serve God better, then it's a human being. A human being, the greatness of a human being is that we can live for something higher, that we don't have to be selfish. Animals are inherently selfish. They're not bad, they're not evil, they were created that way, but that's what they are. Animals are all about themselves. The human being has the power to transcend themselves, to serve a higher authority, to serve God. And therefore, if as a human being, meaning with a higher purpose in mind, with a higher agenda in mind, we eat the meat, we then elevate the meat to the level of the human being. According to this approach, eating the meat of an animal is actually doing the animal the greatest favor. It is allowing the animal to attain its most highest, its greatest level that it can reach, to transcend what it is and become a human being. And become on the level and become part of a human being, which then the human being serves God, and it's all transformed into godliness. So why then, till the flood, was it forbidden? So the answer to that is, in this approach, is that until the flood, the world was created, and it was limited, everything was limited to being its nature. So inanimate was inanimate, plant life was plant life, animals stuck with being animals, human beings were stuck with being human beings. The ability to transcend oneself and to be elevated wasn't there. The flood, Kabbalistically, was not only a punishment. The flood was a purification of the world. The flood purified and elevated the world to the extent that now, when a human being will eat an animal, we are now able to elevate the animal to the level of a human being, which was not possible pre-flood, because before the flood, the world might have been good, but it was sort of stuck. Everything was stuck into what it was before the great purification that the flood gave to the world, the purity that the flood gave to the world, that we are now able to elevate meat to become into a higher level. So to summarize, Torah looks at it that of course animals have rights. We are commanded to treat animals with dignity and not cause them any unnecessary pain. Which is why, as we mentioned last week, when we do kill an animal to eat, we kill it with a special knife, which is extremely thin, and it causes the least possible pain to the animal. However, we have to also have in mind that the human life is infinitely greater than the animal life, and that is why we are commanded to eat meat, that we elevate the animal to our level. We allow the animal to achieve its greatness. Have a good day.